Well, this is our big Sunday of the year, bigger than Christmas, really. I mean, the resurrection is such big news, and so it's wonderful. There were a handful of us stalwarts who we were out in the park this morning. Yes, it was raining, I think pretty continually, but we're here. Where were you? No, just kidding. It was nice. It was really nice. Although you couldn't tell when the sun came up. It was like overcast, so that's okay. That works great. Every Easter, this happens Christmas too, but every Easter I ask myself, there's nothing new to learn about Easter, so we might as well just say, go read it for yourself. It's in John chapter da-da-da, and then just go home and eat some more cake and go home. I mean, that's a pretty cynical way of looking at Easter. But every year I'm surprised. I look at stuff and I go, oh, wait, I never realized that. How can you I've been a believer for nearly 50 years. How can you be reading this for 50 years and it's different? Not different, it's deeper every time. So this year I was praying through, as we came up to this month, I was praying through and saying, well, God, you know what I'd love to do? This would be really cool. Sunday would be really cool if we could actually get a real apostle here from the first century and we could just interview him. And then I wouldn't have to do anything. And, we'd just say, so what was it like on that day? So God's not chuckling in the background. I am. But I thought, well, let's look at the four gospel accounts and see what the morning was like for the apostles. And I thought I knew, but I didn't. So this is kind of in place of maybe someday, I don't know, after everything's done, I'll get a chance to meet one of them and say, okay, give me your story of the resurrection day. I mean, what was it really like? Because we know by the gospel accounts, it was kind of a mixed thing. Mixed with a capital M. And that's what we're going to paint a picture of today and see if we can put ourselves in the shoes of the apostles on Easter Day. Now, the problem is, sort of like, we have this problem. It's sort of like when you go into a bookstore and you pick up a mystery novel and you turn to the last page and you say, oh, well, the butler did it, so I don't need to buy that, right? Well, we already know how this ends. So when the Easter week starts, when we come up to the grand entry of Jesus, we know he's going to die at the end of the week, but we know he's going to rise again. So it loses its edge. It's like reading it's the plot has gone easy for us. But for the apostles, they did not know how this was going to end. Even though Jesus warned them time and again what was going to happen, they still didn't get it. How can they be so stupid? That would not have happened to us. No, it would have happened to you too. So, but literally, they really had no clue what was going to happen. They were so in the dark. So, from moment to moment in the death and resurrection story, everything is a surprise. So that's what we want to look at today. In fact, the death itself, we're not going to talk much about. We're going to talk about the resurrection. But the death itself, although Jesus warned them how many times when he was coming back into Jerusalem? Look, the Son of Man's going to be taken, and they're going to beat him, and he's going to be dead. Okay. So he told them that, but they just still didn't get it. So when bad turned to worse, and the crowds came in the middle of the night to the Garden of Gethsemane, and they arrested him, and it looked like Jesus didn't take charge of the situation, and it got worse and worse as dawn came up. And then the worst of the worst happens, and they haul him off, and they crucify him. And the apostles are, what? Right? And we know they scattered. They scatter. I mean, they just scatter. So that tells you that they just didn't have a grasp of what was going to happen. So when you get to the resurrection, they really didn't expect that. So let's see if we can paint the picture for that. This is a picture by one of our favorite friends, Jacques Tissot, James Tissot, who painted ultra-realistic scenes in Israel in the late 19th century. And he had a religious conversion very late in his life, and he decided to go back to Israel and to do pencil sketches of Israel and to take them back to his art studio in Paris and then draw scenes from the New Testament and the Old. He passed away while he was drawing scenes of the Old Testament, but his scenes of the New Testament about the life of Jesus are very complete. So you're going to see a lot of Tissot, okay? So Tissot, Tissot. Look him up. If you're ever into New York City, the Brooklyn Museum has his entire New Testament collection on the walls there. So courtesy of them, we get to show these this morning. So this is his view back in 1895 of what Jerusalem looked like when you stood at the Mount of Olives. in 1895. And it's actually very much like it was back in the time of Jesus. Today it's changed a lot. It's modernized. But you're on a hill to the east of the city. There's the Kidron Valley that goes down below you. And then it comes up to the wall that goes around what today is a Muslim site, but used to be where the temple was in Jesus' time. So not too different from Jesus' time. So we're going to take a look at some of these. Okay, so here I'm going to do for you, we're going to survey from beginning to end, exhaustively, all the resurrection appearances that show up in the Gospels. Every single one of them. Amen. Okay? So let's not leave any of them out so we can sort of figure out what's going on. It starts here, and you know about this one. Sunday a.m., so that's Sunday Resurrection Day a.m., Mary Magdalene and another Mary go to the tomb. And then let me just include the next one. Sunday a.m. at light, Joanna and some others come. Now, if you're trying to make sense of these accounts, most people who study this pretty deeply will probably say that when you read about the women coming to the tomb, it was two groups of women, not just a single visit. Two groups of women. How do we know that? The first one, when you look at John's account in that first account, Matthew and John, but John especially says that they came while it was still totally dark. It's pitch black. And then the second account says they came after it was light. The first account, they do not bring any spices. The second account, they bring spices. The first account, they see Jesus. The second account, they don't see Jesus. So pretty clearly, it looks like we have two events. We have some people coming earlier in the dark and some people coming later with spices. They see Jesus on the first trip, but not on the second trip. The first trip, Mary Magdalene does run into angels. They run into angels. She goes back and tells the apostles. And the apostles, Peter and John, come running to the tomb to check out the empty tomb. But there's no Jesus in those accounts. I mean, it's clearly a different time. Jesus shows up later on when the women who come with spices. So we have these two things going on. So what's it like for the apostles during this time? Well, they're a little frustrated that at first light, Jesus comes first to the women. Now, we don't know that for sure, that they're really miffed about that, but it is really unorthodox, because if they were in charge of the story, Jesus would come to them first. Because after all, they're the ones whose lives are in danger as well because they're associated with Jesus. But Jesus does not come to them first. In fact, in these two accounts here, Jesus doesn't make any appearances to the apostles, just to the women. Now, again, if you want to talk about the authenticity of the New Testament, if you were going to devise a story, you would not put women as the people to which Jesus first appeared. Because women are they're like hamstruck witnesses to any truth in the first century. In fact, their testimony in courts wasn't even legally admissible. So women are not really good witnesses from a historical perspective. If you're going to write a book where people accept what happened, you don't have Jesus appearing to women. I'm sorry, ladies, but that's the first century reality of things. But he does here. It's Jesus' way of saying, neener, neener, neener. So he gives this wonderful honor to the women. Just like he does when he's born, he first appears to shepherds. So, I mean, this is what goes on. So here, the apostles are still cowering on early Sunday morning. They get accounts from these ladies, and especially in the first account, that not only is the tomb empty, which is what they run to confirm, but also we saw Jesus. And they go, well, we ran to the tomb and we didn't see Jesus. So it's frustrating for them because they have not seen Jesus yet, but the women have. So let's push on to the next account. It goes all the way to the late afternoon. Just prior to dinner time, there's those two guys going to Emmaus. In between, we have no accounts of any appearances of Jesus. None. So from the very early morning at dawn, from the two groups of ladies, until it's just a couple hours before dark and dinner time. So these guys are walking to Emmaus. You know the story. You can find it in detail in Luke. Mark mentions it in passing at the end of Mark. He says that some guys were walking out in the woods or something. So late afternoon, road to Emmaus. Jesus with those two guys. But neither one of those two guys is one of the apostles. So now they're talking with Jesus. Go read the story. I won't recount the whole thing. They're talking with Jesus. They realize it's Jesus. As soon as they realize that was Jesus they were with, they turn around. They go the 7 miles or so back into Jerusalem to find the apostles. And they burst into the apostles and say, guess what, guess what, guess what, guess what? That's Jim's version. We saw Jesus. Well, the women told him, we saw Jesus. And the apostles are sitting going, well, we haven't seen Jesus. So by dinner time of that same day, how frustrating for them. Here, their entire world seemed to crumble. They followed him voluntarily for 3 years. They gave up a lot. They moved away from their families. They were itinerant with Jesus. And they put all of their trust that Jesus was going someplace really big. That's why they followed him. And then he got himself killed. And now we have women telling us he's raised, and these 2 guys going to Emmaus saying he's raised, but we haven't seen Jesus. So Resurrection Day for the apostles isn't just a chorus of alleluias. It's, well, wait a second. What about us? So they're kind of hung out. Well, while the guys from Emmaus are telling the story, boom, then Jesus shows up. This is what Luke tells us in his narrative, is that why they come back and they're telling the story about walking 7 miles to their home outside of town. Then, right after that, Jesus is there. Their reaction is not uniformly worshipful. They're still sort of shell-shocked is what it is. But indeed, they're there, okay? And wow, this is, okay, so we've finally seen who Jesus is. One guy's missing. Thomas isn't there. So Thomas isn't there, but at least they've seen Jesus. And when you read the account of this first inside appearance with the apostles, in Luke and John is where you find these. If your eyes are real sharp, you can see the notes at the end of those, Luke and John. The interaction, remember the interaction between Jesus and the apostles when Thomas is not there is not very long. It seems to be almost a cameo appearance. And he's gone again. Now, we don't know that the account just didn't, it wasn't exhaustive. That could be the case. But really, if Jesus sat with them and talked about a lot of things, it was not recorded. It seems like he was just there for a brief moment and then gone. So if we can take that and say that that's what's going on, then they did get to see Jesus. Yay! But they didn't get to see Jesus for very long. And as the apostles who are trying to figure out what the whole rest of their life is going to be about, they're full of questions. You don't see those questions asked in the upper room when the 10 are there. You don't see Jesus answering. You see almost nothing. It's very short. So I have to believe when you read that very short account that first encounter with Jesus risen is like a shocker. It's a shocker to them. They're kind of don't know what to deal with it, and they also don't get to ask any questions. It's sort of rude. Well, there is not another account of Jesus seeing the apostles until a week later. So for an entire week, as far as we know in the documentation, it was radio silence from Jesus. Now, that may not be the case with others because we know in the book of Acts that Jesus appeared to people for 40 days. Paul says that Jesus occurred in one setting to 500 people at once. So he did show up in places that we know are not documented. But as far as what the Bible says, we don't have any documented appearances of Jesus after the end of Resurrection Day and at least a week and a half later. It's like, do you remember what the next appearance is? Week and a half later, 8 days? I'll tell you in just a second. First, I want to point this out because you need to stick this in your head. In that first 2 accounts, what makes them common is the fact that the angels say to the women that are there, very explicitly, tell the apostles to go to Galilee and I'll meet them there. Let me just read them because here they are. Mark 16:7. The angel says, go tell his disciples and Peter. We made jokes about that for years. Go tell his disciples and Peter that he's going before you to Galilee. There you will see him, just as he told you. Now, even just in how that's phrased, tells me they're a little miffed that Jesus didn't make his first appearance to them. Go to Galilee and you'll see him there. Okay? Well, and then another angel account in Matthew. Go quickly, tell his disciples he's risen from the dead, and behold, he's going before you to Galilee, and there you will see him. See, I've told you. That last phrase, see, I've told you, means, come on, it's my word. It's going to happen, okay? It'll happen. So, see, they will. So go and tell the guys that. So presumably that's what they did. I mean, they went back in those accounts. They told the apostles, we've seen Jesus. And he has a very, very special message for you. Very special message. Oh, okay, what's that? Go to Galilee and you'll see him there. You mean, not here? What? Yeah, go to Galilee, you'll see him there. And then Jesus himself says it. When you look in the Matthew 28 account, when Jesus appears to Mary Magdalene, Jesus said to them, don't be afraid. Go and tell my brothers to go to Galilee, and there they will see me. So it's the only really consistent message in the resurrection appearances of Jesus, really, where he talks about nothing else, answers no other questions. He does say, and the angels say, go to Galilee. Go to Galilee. Okay? So that's what we're going to pursue today, is going to Galilee. So what is so important in Galilee? And that's the question I ask myself as I'm reading this, trying to read it for the first time. What is so stinking important in Galilee? Because after all the actions in Jerusalem, we just finished Pesach, we just finished Passover, Feast of Unleavened Bread. I mean, and we're coming into about a 7-week period, a hiatus, and then people will come back into town 7 weeks later. So for Pentecost, so, what is so important in Galilee? All the actions here in Jerusalem. People are buzzing around saying, look, there's the empty tomb. There's no one in there. There's no one there. What's going to go on? I don't know. Where's Jesus? I don't know. I mean, that's where the buzz is. But they have to go to Galilee. So in their minds and in my mind, since this is such a repeated and powerful message, what is in Galilee? And that's what we want to answer today. This is the question that comes to my mind all the time. What's in Galilee that it's so important for them to go to Galilee? Now, if I was writing the Bible, I would make it some stupendously great thing. I mean, it's like, you go to Galilee, and one night you'll be sleeping, and like when the angels announce the birth of Jesus, you'll be sleeping and you're outside near the campfire some night, and then the skies will open up, and you'll see an angelic host of them saying, glory to God, and here's Jesus, and Jesus will be coming down like a flaming fire out of the sky, and go, oh, my apostles, I'm here, something big and dramatic, right? Something like, wow. So everything's back on again. Jesus is in charge. He really wasn't killed. He's really alive now. He didn't stay dead. Okay, great. Something big. Something big. That's if I was writing the Bible. But something big does not happen in Galilee, at least at first view. So let's take a look and see what happens, because this is where all those other accounts point us to. By the way, we're going to go to Galilee right now. Before that, I'll put you out of your misery. 8 days later is when Thomas finally sees Jesus with the other 11. That's what happens. And now we're going to leave Jerusalem, because it turns out, it seems as though the apostles, even though they were told very clearly by the women they need to go to Galilee, they stuck around in Jerusalem for over a week. Why? I don't know. But they clearly did not go to Galilee. And this was the persistent message from the angels and from Jesus through the women that went there. You need to go to Galilee, but you check your watch, and a week later, they're still sitting in Jerusalem. And so finally, I have to believe, and I'm speculating here, I have to believe that even the second appearance of Jesus while Thomas was there was a way for Jesus to say, go to Galilee. If you won't believe the women, go to Galilee, okay? So we don't have that recorded. We don't have Jesus recorded saying that when the 11 are there, when Thomas is there. We have a very famous account where Thomas touches his hands and feet, and I mean, it's really a very cool scene. But they linger in town for a week when they were told not to. They should go to Galilee. Okay, so now we're going to go to Galilee. What's important there? What's going to happen there? Why is it so important on Jesus' agenda? And by the way, if you are prone to motion sickness, you might want to look away in a second, because we're going to go to Galilee now. So here we go. You ready? We start off over the United States, North and South America. There's the boundaries right there, because somewhere there. Oh, yeah, okay, right there. The boundaries between, just in case you don't know where Canada and Mexico are. Yeah, never mind. Okay, so let's go across the Atlantic. So we fly across the Atlantic. Boy, I wish air travel was this fast. We go over Spain and across most of the length of the Mediterranean Sea to the eastern end. We'll pause there for a second. Up in the center north is Turkey, and to the left of that is Greece. Left of that, the boot of Italy. The bottom green triangle is the Nile Delta. And now we come down into Israel. We'll actually come down to Jerusalem, where the apostles are starting their walk to Galilee. You come down, that's the Dead Sea, that vertical dark thing right there. And there's Jerusalem right at the top tip of it, but higher in altitude. So for them to go to Galilee, they likely went down in the Jordan River Valley, which flows out of Galilee in the north, and they went up the Jordan River Valley until they came to the Sea of Galilee up here. Beautiful freshwater lake. By the way, this is a modern picture. This is not ancient. But they didn't stay in the south, because their homes were on the north end of the lake at a place you probably recognize if you read the New Testament, Capernaum. and or Capernaum, if you want to say it in the actual. So they're in Capernaum. So very likely they went up to Capernaum. We don't have biblical evidence for that, but it's very likely that's the end that they went to, because that's where their families were. And they came up here. So when Jesus says, go to Galilee, this is likely where they went. And that's indeed, if you go to Israel, that's what it looks like this very day. That's what Galilee looks like. So, yeah. On the left top of the screen, that land to the left top of your screen is Jordan. And everything to the right of your screen is Israel right here. So that's how close things are. Golan Heights that we talk about is off to the left of the screen. So they go up there. And of course, if they come back to the place where they made a living and where they have family, how do they make a living up there? Fishing. Yeah. So here's how the account goes. After this, Jesus revealed himself again to the disciples by the Sea of Tiberias. The Sea of Galilee goes by several names. Sea of Tiberias, that's the largest city, even to this day, in Galilee. Sea of Tiberias, or the Sea of Gennesaret, Lake of Gennesaret. You'll see a lot of them. But he revealed himself in this way. So John takes us in chapter 21 to what happened. So here's who's there. Simon Peter. You need to count with your fingers now. Simon Peter. Thomas, called the twin. Don't give him two. He's just one. Nathanael of Cana. Cana's just over the mountain to the right in that picture. Sons of Zebedee, James and John. And two others of his disciples were together. What'd you get? Seven. Where's the other guys? We don't know. We don't know. So Jesus tells the women to tell the guys, go to Galilee, and only 7 of them get there. I don't know where the rest of them are. Who are the other 2? We don't know. Very likely Peter's brother, Andrew, probably, because he grew up there. Who's the last guy who has a Galilee connection? Yeah, hard to say. Matthew came from up there, but he's not a fisherman. So anyway, so we don't know. So there's only 7 guys up there, so they're sort of doing what Jesus wants. And since they got time to kill and they don't know what's going to happen, of course, they decide to do this. So Simon Peter said to him, I'm going fishing. So they said to him, well, we'll go with you. So they went out and got into the boat, but that night they caught nothing. Wah, wah, wah. Kind of sad. You know they fish at night in Galilee. To this very day they fish at night. The fish are attracted to lights from the boats. So you push out after dinner time, you wait for the sun to go down, you push out in the lake, you find out where you are, and you put out lights, and the fish also come up because of the temperatures in the lake at night. So they always go fishing. That's why it says in this particular case, they stayed out all night, but they didn't catch anything. That's the best time to fish, is at night. So they didn't catch anything. And so I'm thinking, okay, I'm trying to experience what the apostles experienced. They had a couple appearances down in Jerusalem. They seemed to be really short. They had a few brief encounters with Jesus, just enough to encourage them to go to Galilee, you guys. So they go to Galilee, 7 of them. I don't know where the other 4 are. 7 of them go up to Galilee, and they're up there, they're killing time. They decide to fish because, after all, we're fishermen. And then they suffer the biggest, humiliation ever. They fish, and they catch nothing. Nothing. 0. Not just a little. It's hard when you have those kinds of nets to catch nothing. You catch something, but you don't catch nothing. This has been a bad week. Now, how far away are we from Resurrection Day? Resurrection Day was Sunday. 8 days later was Thomas in the upper room with the guys. It takes at least 2 days to walk to Galilee. So we're talking 10 plus days from Resurrection Sunday. And still, the whole encounter with Jesus is very unsatisfactory. Really. They got 1,000 questions. They didn't stay down in Jerusalem where it seems like the questions will get answered. That's where Jesus, after all, seems to have appeared already. Why in the world are we going to Galilee? And what are we doing in Galilee? We're cooling our jets, fishing, and at that, failures at it. So it's really a little demoralizing. For them, the Easter Sunday, the Resurrection Day, woohoo, has not happened yet. Except for that brief moment in the upper room, which I think for them was more traumatic than it was instructive. Really. So nothing. Well, just as day was breaking, Jesus stood on the shore. Yet the disciples didn't know it was Jesus. Now, why didn't they know it was Jesus? In a second, he'll tell us how far away from shore they were, because the fishermen to this day, they fish at different distances from the shore based on the shallowness of the lake. Deeper waters are colder, shallower waters are warmer at different times of year. They're about 100 yards. They're a football field away from the shore. I can't recognize someone at the end of a football field, so that's why they can't recognize him. And it also, it's sort of dark, the sun's just coming up, and there's a guy on the shore who's harassing us, saying, you'll see, here it comes. Hey, how's the fishing? And I can see them just all harumphing on the boat. Like, I don't know who that guy is, but yeah. Okay, so that's where they're at. I mean, that's literally where they're at. Emotionally, this seems more like harassment than anything else. Okay, so how's the fishing, guys? And they answered him, no. We can't hear you. Okay, no. Okay. No. Have you caught any fish? No. No. Thanks for making our day a little bit worse. I mean, it's really a ding on the pride of these guys. They may have thought that their lives following Jesus for 3 years have now become total waste of time because Jesus got killed. He did have this resurrection appearance. We're not exactly sure where that leaves us, though. I mean, does that mean we go back home? We don't know. I mean, it's all confusion. And on top of that, we could be here at home in Capernaum. We go back to fishing, but all evidence points to the facts that we're failures at it now. Maybe we've forgotten how to do it in 3 years. So for them, it's still a huge amount of confusion. And now there's some guy asking us if we've caught any fish, and we have to scream out to him 100 yards away, no! They're really not having a good time. This resurrection day big thing is just frustrating. So he says to him, well, cast your net on the right side of the boat and you'll find some. So what do you think the reaction to that is? And see, we can only speculate. I mean, really, we can only speculate. But yeah. Oh, yeah, says who? You know, it's like, So I think someone on the boat probably said, just humor the guy. I mean, just do it. Well, so they cast it, and now they were not able to haul it in because of the quantity of fish. Love this picture. That's not their boat, but that's fish. So they couldn't because of the quantity of fish. Now they're standing in the boat going, wait a second. Wait a second. And one of them, probably John, remembers that 3 years ago, Jesus did a similar thing. You can read about it in Luke 5. When Jesus first encounters Peter, he does this, right? Remember that scene when Jesus is there and he's preaching to all these people and they're running out of space and they're kind of crowding him on the shoreline at the lake right there. And he looks to Peter, who's just cleaning his nets, and he's getting his boat all cleaned up after a whole night of fishing. And Peter doesn't really know much about Jesus at this point. And Peter's just there on a fishing boat. And Jesus says, hey, can I borrow your boat? Why don't you, I'll get in your boat and we'll just pull away from the shore and I'll preach to the people here. That'll keep them at least the water distance away from me, right? So he does that. And then, go read Luke 5. I won't summarize all of it. But then he says, so how'd the fishing go last night? And he says, let's do some more. And Peter, at first, in Luke 5, I mean, he resists. He said, well, look, we were out all night. And you can hear in the way he says it, he's saying, we're out all night. Hey, we're the fishermen. You might be the preacher, but we're the fishermen. You might be a carpenter guy, but hey, guys who cut wood have no idea how fish think. So I'm putting a lot of words in Peter's mouth. But he does resist at first, and then he does it, and this happens in Luke 5. So I think while they're in the boat, and this happens, and they're struggling with all these fish, someone is thinking, wait. And we think it's John, because 7, that disciple whom Jesus loved, that was John's way of referring to himself, therefore said to Peter, it's the Lord. Duh, it's the Lord. Well, it tells you something, really. It implies something about the trauma that these guys are in. From the resurrection day, from the lack of being the one that Jesus first comes to, from the trauma of thinking they're going to get arrested and killed as well. I mean, it's been a tough couple weeks. And now they're back doing something familiar, They're failures at it, but it's something familiar. And it takes John, who's the youngest of the entire group, to kind of go, ding. Now, we know John was there 3 years earlier, because John and his brother were helping with Peter and Andrew. So we know that John was there. So John goes, Peter? Peter's not getting it. Don't we love Peter? He always seems to not get it until he gets it. Then he really gets it. So it's kind of nice. It's really kind of nice. Peter, it's the Lord. So what happens? He still has this great picture. They're way too close to shore for this. We ought to talk to Tissot about that. When Simon Peter heard that it was the Lord, he put on his outer garment, for he was stripped for work, and threw himself into the sea. So when Peter gets it, he gets it. There's speculation at this point whether or not Peter was intending to swim or to walk to shore. And we'll just speculate on that ourselves. We don't know. But we do know he makes it into the water. So he goes in the water, and he threw himself into the sea. I love that. It doesn't say he dove or he tried to walk. He just threw himself in the sea. This is impetuous, highly believing, strong-headed Peter. We love the guy to death. The other disciples came in the boat. We'll stay in the boat, Peter. You just go ahead. We stayed in the boat, dragging the net full of fish, for they were not far from the land, but about 100 yards off. By the way, 100 yards off, if you remember the picture I showed you at the top end of the Sea of Galilee with Capernaum in the bottom of the picture and looking south across the lake, that capital C in the title Capernaum is about half a football field long. So it's 2 C's in that picture. We'll see that picture again in a second. So they weren't that far off, but 100 yards still is a quite long way. So they row the boat back. Peter's thrashing in the water. 9, when they got out on land, they saw a charcoal fire in place with fish laid out on it and bread. Cool. And Jesus said to him, bring some of the fish that you just caught. So Simon Peter went aboard and hauled the net ashore. It sounds like he did it single-handedly. No. But it was full of large fish, 153 of them. Again, another interesting speculation. Who counted it and why? But it has also spawned 2 millennia of speculation about what the number means. In fact, if you Google and you type 153, you will find all sorts of craziness about what this means. It's pretty interesting, but I don't think it has, I don't know. He just wanted to impress you that these were large fish, and there were 153 of them, so this was a big catch. It was a big, big catch. So they bring it in, they struggle to get it in, and Jesus said to them, come and have breakfast. Come and have breakfast. Yeah. Well, none of the disciples dared ask him, who are you? They knew it was the Lord. They just knew it was the Lord. So this is one of my favorite pictures of Tissot. He's got 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8 guys. We picked up someone in the mix. I don't know who that was. But he has them around there with Jesus. And Jesus is sitting there cooking food, which is likely very much what happened. This stack of round things down in the bottom, you know what that is? That's the bread. Tissot, when he went to Israel, like if you go to Israel today and you talk about bread, that's it. Round little cakes, great with hummus and wonderful stuff. So he just put that in there, some large fish. Those actually are, if you go to Galilee, those are large fish for the Sea of Galilee. Sea of Galilee usually has what they call St. Peter's fish, and they look more like bluegill sized, things like that. They're not very much meat on them. So these are big fish. So Tissot did his homework. Those are big fish. So they sit around there, and John goes on. Jesus came, took the bread, gave it to them, and so with the fish. So clearly he really is hosting a picnic lunch on the shore. That's what he's doing. He's sitting there cooking for them. And the fire isn't just a big raging, flaming fire. To cook fish, you can't put it on a flaming fire. You have to put it on coals, which means you have to build a big fire, and then you have to let it sort of burn down until you have coals. Like s'mores fires? Yeah. You have to get down to the s'mores phase on the fire, and then you get the coals, or what they would call at the time an anthrax fire. Anthrax in Greek is the word for coal. A glowing red coal. And when you get an infection from anthrax on your skin, it looks like a glowing coal. So that's why anthrax is called anthrax, because it looks like a coal from a fire. And you didn't think you'd learn anything today. So the coals are there. He's cooking fish. He's warming bread. and he's being camp host. These guys have been out all night long, who are frustrated with life in general, who are full of questions and never had a chance to ask them. And on top of all that, they're starved. So Jesus says, well, let's eat, guys. And he hosts a breakfast on the beach. I like this picture. And then before John finishes his account, he says this. This was now the third time that Jesus was revealed to the disciples after he was raised from the dead. So the first time, that night. Second time, 8 days later with Thomas. Third time here, around 2 weeks after Resurrection Day. They finally get the undivided and long attention of Jesus. And what does Jesus want to do? Eat. And you know what? That was what was so important in Galilee. Really? Really? Breakfast on the beach? So at this point, you just kind of have to kick back in your chair and think about that. The angels were insistent. Jesus was insistent. Ladies, go tell the men to go to Galilee and you'll see them there. Well, they are seeing them here. So, okay, but no big flashy things from heaven? No big heavenly host and the Messiah and all his glory? And, I mean, breakfast? Like, breakfast? Now, there is wonderfully warm theology in this. I mean, there really is. So what's important in Galilee? By the way, I'm going to stop John's account right there, and we're going to reflect on this just a little bit. But I want you to go and finish John's account 21, because around that campfire, around the fish and the bread, there's one of the coolest sets of conversations that happen. And they reflect really the intimacy of what this breakfast was all about, really. And we don't have time to look at that, but I want you to look at that. It's really something. I just want to stand back and realize that the angels and Jesus himself were so insistent that they go to Galilee so that they wouldn't miss their breakfast appointment. That's cool. So it was all about breakfast at Tiberias. Not breakfast at Tiffany's. Moon River. No, breakfast at Tiberias. For what? For fish, for fire, and for fellowship. So before we reflect on that a little bit more, because I'm going to let that kind of mull in your mind for a while, because that was why go to Galilee. Believe it or not. That was it. Fish, fire, fellowship. Really? Yes. And we'll meditate on that for a second, because I think it's pretty cool. Before I do that, I want to show you the rest of the appearances. So, because we'll fill out all the appearances of Jesus after the resurrection. We moved to Galilee. So Jerusalem, Galilee, that's the J and the G on the side. So here we are in Galilee, 10 plus days out from the resurrection day, Tiberias. And then again, in Matthew's gospel, the very last several sentences in Matthew's gospel says that Jesus is talking to them on a mountain in Galilee. A mountain in Galilee. We don't know anything else about that. That's all. And those are the only two things that happen in Galilee. The mountaintop thing is the last words in the Gospel of Matthew. The Great Commission and stuff like that. So that's a big deal. But it's Jesus sort of painting a picture for what the future is going to be all about, with them included. So that is a big deal. But that's all the Galilee stuff. There is no other Galilee stuff. So when the angels are insistent about they go to Galilee, you've seen them. You've seen them now. It's what we just saw in John 21, and it's the end of Matthew, where they're on a mountain in Galilee, and Jesus is having some discussions with them. Later, we're back in Jerusalem. They come back down to Jerusalem. And Mark mentions at the end of his gospel that Jesus appeared to them while they were reclined for dinner. We don't have any other information about that. We presume that was back in Jerusalem when they came down from Galilee to go back to Jerusalem. They had to go back to Jerusalem anyway for Pentecost, which was 7 weeks later. And 7 times 7 is 49. And the day after that is 50. Pentecost means 50. See, you learned 3 things today. So there you go. So Pentecost. So they have to come back anyway. So they're in Jerusalem. And then one last time, somewhere within 40 days, there's the ascension on the Mount of Olives. Luke is the only writer who tells us that fact, both in his Gospel of Luke and in Acts, which he authors as well. He tells about the ascension. So there's the ascension. They're on the Mount of Olives, and Jesus goes up into heaven. And you know what? That's it. With the exception of one. Do you know which one I'm thinking of? Paul. road to Damascus. So that's not in the Gospels. That's Paul, but Paul tells that story a number of times, both in his letters and in Acts. In Acts itself, he tells it many times. Slightly different to add a little more color to it, to fill in some of the gaps, but it's the same story every time. But that's it. That's all we know. But for the apostles, this is it for the apostles. And even the first couple of things in this list, the apostles weren't there. They were just told messages. And that message was, go to Galilee. They would go to Galilee. For what? Okay. Am I off again? I'm here. Okay, sorry. Must have been me. Okay, let's go back and think about this for a second. Why is this so important? Why is this breakfast on the beach so important? Well, there is fellowship. And for these guys, for what they've been through for the last 2 weeks, and remember, they've been in hiding. They were afraid that the same thing would happen to them if they had made public their allegiance with Jesus, even made their faces known. They were afraid because things were just going crazy in Jerusalem. They hadn't really had a chance to get out much. So there was fellowship with Jesus because it seemed like the visit they had with Jesus was truncated and pretty unsatisfactory. What they would like to do is sit Jesus down and say, look, man, I've got a million questions. I think the breakfast on the beach was where they got to ask their million questions. Because breakfast is like that. I mean, you can have breakfast with someone, you can get through your eggs and your sausages and whatever you got, and then you can sit over coffee and you can just talk. That's why I like the image of the reality of this breakfast on the beach. It's a slow time. No one's pushing us. Even the crowds that were so characteristic in the north in Galilee at the end of Jesus' ministry, huge crowds. You had to escape from them. They're not there. You know why? They're down in Jerusalem. Now they will be returning very soon, but they're probably still there for the Feast of Unleavened Bread, which happens around Passover. They'll be trickling back, but they can probably sit on the seashore where everyone knows who Jesus is from his ministry and really be left alone for a while. It's a nice kind of break. That's why, since there's no account of anyone else from the town or from the villages coming out, we're pretty sure this is probably still going on during the Feast of Unleavened Bread in the south. So they're probably still out of town, probably. And that's speculation too. But they would be unmolested. They could just sit there with Jesus and munch on their fish and ask questions. Fellowship, great thing. And then there's food. That always goes with the breakfast. And when you're hungry, that's great. In fact, I changed in my life as a Boy Scout when I ate trout that I just caught from a lake, and I ate it 10 minutes later on a fire. I thought fish was horrible until I had that. I never had that creamy, delicate, fall off the bone. No one brought trout today? Hey, and I have to say something before I forget. No one brought bacon. I'm still a little miffed about that, but I'll make it through. That's okay. That means next year we'll have tables of bacon. That's pretty nice. But the food, I mean, it's just a really nice touch because here's Jesus meeting their immediate needs and doing it in such a gracious, warm, hospitable, no other agendas. Hey, guys, that's why it's just really, sit down, let's have breakfast. Let's just have breakfast. The warmth of that, I just find amazing. How much better than having this big heavenly vision with weird blasts of thunder and lightning and whatever would go on, to just say, let's just have breakfast. Fish, food, yeah, and plenty. All you can eat. This is an all-you-can-eat morning. And then you have fire, okay, which is nice and warm, and you have failure. Had to mention failure. Because they had just spent one of the worst nights of their lives. and being egged on by some who knows who on the shore. Hey, did you catch any fish? Right, yeah. They've just went through this horrible failure. But there's more failure that's meeting Jesus here than just not catching fish. Remember during the crucifixion, what was their reaction? They all denied him. And I don't think they made the record straight with Jesus in that brief upper room appearance with Thomas and before Thomas. I don't think they ever got that kind of ironed out. So here they are on the shore having breakfast with this thing hanging over their heads. Failures. In fact, if you read the rest of John's account in John 21, that's the conversation Peter has with Jesus. It's all connected to Peter's failure earlier. So it really is personified there. But there they are. I mean, here's an interesting thing. This guy's beckoning them to come to shore to sit down and eat breakfast. And yet they're the ones thinking, but you really shouldn't be hosting me. I just treated you horribly on the day you were killed. I told people I didn't even know who you were. I mean, talk about feeling horrible. Well, how do you make someone feel not horrible about what they've done? Hey, come on over. Let's have some food. Let's sit down. Let's eat. We can talk stuff out. Wonderfully warm. I mean, this is brilliant for these guys who have this guilt just hanging on their head. What we've done. And yet, look, here's Jesus right in front of us, and he's serving us breakfast. Not unlike Jesus as he served them in the upper room when he washed their feet. Jesus seems to always be serving them, even when they're total mess-ups. There's theology in this. There's more that you see when you look at this. It's very informal. It's not religious. See, Jesus could have said, go to Galilee and you guys build an altar. Yeah, this is a good idea. You guys build an altar, big, nice thing up there in Galilee where you spent all that time, and you can build an altar to the Son of God, and we can do all these sacrifices, and we can do all this religious hoo-ha stuff, and we can kill some goats and some lambs and just do some crazy stuff, and you can worship me, and I can walk across the lake a few more times just to impress you and all that kind of. We can just really make it a big old day from a religious perspective. But it's totally the most unreligious event that I can think of. There's no religious here at all. It's just informal. I love it. Not only that, it's personal. It's personal. You guys, you sit across from me, we talk, we eat, we talk, we eat. Nothing big, just personal. And then there's answers. We only have answers that are supplied to Peter and the rest of John, in John's account of this personal stuff. But answers. I have to believe that they had such unlimited time, not only around the breakfast here at the lake, but maybe more time up in Galilee, because there's time that they could finally say, okay, I got another question. And Jesus would say, okay, I got another answer. Hit me. And they would just go. You remember the Apostle Paul, when Paul stopped on the road to Damascus while he's breathing, fire and brimstone against those Christians who are blasphemous, and Jesus stops him and says, hey, why are you persecuting me? Well, do you remember in Paul's life how long it took him to sort this all out? And in many accounts it looks like, a little speculatively, but it looks like before he went into ministry full-time talking about Jesus, it took him nearly a decade to get his head straight. To answer all the questions that he had about, well, then how does this fit? How does this fit? How does that work? It took him a while to get his head straight. I think this is a great investment on the apostles getting their head straight. So what exactly is going down? So why did you have to die? How come you didn't tell us you're going to die? I told you. Okay, well, that's true. Okay, wait. But how come, so the raising, how come you didn't come to us first? Well, because the women seem to be waiting for me. Now, I don't know if Jesus said that. But it seems to be true. Because the women were waiting for him, and they were huddled inside, scared. So, I mean, there must have been 1,000 questions. All of them tricky and difficult and sort of awkward. I can come up with a dozen questions about what they would want to ask that kind of paint a bad picture for themselves. I mean, we weren't really stellar in all this. So in this wonderfully candid and informal and personal context, they could ask those hard questions and get their head straight. I just love this. I love this. Also, we find, just stating the obvious, that Jesus comes to where we are. He says, you go to Galilee, but I'll meet you there. I'll meet you there. You be there. I'll meet you there. And he goes to where we are, which is interesting for a second. I'll show you why. And that he's the host of the thing. Wherever it is that he meets us, he's the host. He's in charge. He's the one that's doing the whole thing. Now, why is there theology in this? Because when I made this list and I took a couple steps back from these biblical accounts, I realized that metaphorically, this is exactly my experience coming to Jesus. No big religious thing, full of failures, right? Full of questions, full of uncertainty about the future. But what I found in coming to Jesus was a Jesus who is personal. He seemed to be informal. He seemed to understand me. He seemed to deal with my most fundamental needs and promised to see my most fundamental needs. Not only that, it seemed to be that I didn't have to go find him. He found me. He found me. And when he did, he was always the host. He was always the one that gave. He was always the one that served. I looked at that and realized that's the theology in that for me and for you who've come to Christ and anyone who's considering come to Christ. It's a profoundly personal experience. It is not a religious experience. It's a personal experience. A personal experience with the living Christ. And here's kind of the last cap in the entire thing. If indeed the risen Christ can meet them for a breakfast on the beach and address the most fundamental needs of their heart in a gentle and hospitable way, how much more is he willing to do that today with you? Because he can. Because the risen Christ was risen then, and he's risen now to be with us now. That's the promise that's there. The risen Christ just doesn't change doctrine. It changes the fact that it's actually possible to have a breakfast on the beach participation with the King of Kings and Lord of Lords and the Creator of the universe in a personal, informal way. Where do I have to go? Just stay right where you are. He'll come to you. What do I have to do? Nothing. It's totally informal. But you do have to love him. You do have to believe who he is. You do have to embrace him. And you have to throw your lot in with him, because the apostles here did that very much. After this, they suddenly turn and go down to Jerusalem. And then from that point on in Jerusalem, they are on fire. They're on fire. What changed it? The breakfast at Tiberias. That's the only thing I can point to. The breakfast at Tiberias, where Jesus answered all their questions and invited them to do what he'd always been prepping them to do, which is to send the message of who he was to the entire world. And don't make any excuses. Just tell what you've experienced. So I have the sneaking suspicion that if my dream comes true, I get to ask some of these guys later on, what was the resurrection of Jesus like for you? I don't think they'll quote stuff that happened in Jerusalem. I think they'll say, can I tell you about this breakfast? It was the most wondrous time we've ever had with Jesus. He was so warm. He was so understanding. He was not demanding. But after that point, it changed our lives, and we said, we'll do anything from this point on to tell people who this guy is. And then the simplicity of the message to anyone who hears is, so what do we have to do? Do we have to go to Jerusalem to become one of these Christians? No. Stay exactly where you are. He'll come to you. And what will he do? Well, then he'll invite you to love him and to follow him and to put your trust in him for everything you need. And he'll host you from that point on. So this whole breakfast at Tiberias is a warm way for God to say, this is the personal relationship with Jesus after the resurrection. Now, Paul later on says, if the resurrection didn't happen, we're the most to be pitied of anybody. And why? Well, because in their immediate experience and in our immediate experience, there is no breakfast at Tiberias. There is no personal interaction with Jesus because he's dead and he's gone. But now that he's risen, there are breakfasts at Tiberias, and there's an invitation on our behalf that we can come and join him in that breakfast and join in fellowship with him and come to know him personally and informally. And all the religious hoo-ha that you think is supposed to attend all this kind of stuff with the Son of God is gone. It's just gone. It's Jesus saying, hey, breakfast? Yeah. How's it going? I don't know. I'm confused about life. I don't know where I'm going. I feel like a failure. Everything is confusing to me. Can you clear this up for me? Yeah, I can. More fish? How about some bread? And this is the tender God that we have, who's slow to anger, who's quick on our behalf to listen and to tend to us and to care for us and to invite us into his plans he has for us. And it all starts with a breakfast on the beach. That's how I came to Christ. Kind of a breakfast on the beach with him. That was Galilee. So this is actually the picture that Tissot sketched before he left Galilee, went back to Paris, and he painted those scenes you just saw. If you go to Galilee, if you go to Israel, you'll sit on a part of the top of the Sea of Galilee that's called the primacy of Peter Don't worry about the name of it. But if you go there and your tour guide doesn't take you, go to a place called the Primacy of Peter. It's a totally unspoiled shoreline of the Sea of Galilee that's right at Capernaum, and you can sit there, and that's exactly what you'll see as you look to the south. The mountains that are now part of the Golan Heights and extend up into Jordan, and the sea right there, and the rocks on the beach. I mean, and those rocks are the same rocks that were there 2,000 years ago. It's worth going if you get a chance. But last time I was there, I went to this area of the beach and the top of the Sea of Galilee, and I sat there and I replayed in my head that breakfast. And I said I sure would have liked to have been there. Maybe I was the 8th guy. But there's actually a wonderful theory that Tissot, the artist, knew there was only 7 guys, and he included an 8th guy, and that was all of us. Because that's God's intention for us. Not a religious life, a life in personal relationship with a God who says, have you eaten? How about breakfast? Well, we're going to sing this out because indeed he's changing everything, and for the apostles that day he made everything new, everything switched. The guys who hovered behind locked doors on Resurrection Day, who didn't have that much to really celebrate because they were so shell-shocked by it all, later, 7 weeks later, they're standing in front of 3,000 plus people in Jerusalem preaching about who this Jesus is and what he's done, and the only intervening event that we can figure that things changed radically was the breakfast at Tiberias. I love it. Okay, Father in heaven, we thank you for your great, tremendous love toward us. We thank you for the gentleness of your hospitality toward us, for your understanding of our hearts that are broken, that are confused, that are aimless, that are frustrated about the direction of life. We thank you that you invite us to sit down in your presence and just dump our hearts out to you and say, God, is there any life? Does it come from you? What are your plans for me? Because clearly my plans aren't working. Lord, we thank you for this wonderfully warm scene on this beach where the apostles like us could ask a million questions and then come to understand that they are a witness of one of the most profound things that ever happened in the history of humanity, and that the offer to us of life abundant, like Jesus said, is a reality, And we thank you, Lord, for meeting us where we were and bringing us to your side and delighting us with your presence. And Lord, every time I think that, the words of that psalmist come to my mind, that the nearness of God is my good. The nearness of God is my good. So we thank you for the fact that this indeed, in the flesh, was the nearness of God that changed everything. So thank you for this now. In Jesus' name, amen.